Hello everyone, I'm Priyadarshini Mara, faculty at the Department of Buddhist Studies, University of Delhi. Today, I'm going to talk to you about module number 31 of paper number 11, Philosophy of Buddhism. Now, this module is titled as Nagarjuna's Methodological Approach. So, let us start with an introduction as to what Nagarjuna's philosophy or the doctrines were all about. Nagarjuna, as we have studied earlier, was a profound Buddhist scholar who was an expounder and who initiated the Madhyamik school, or the middle path was his philosophical aspect. So now when we look at the methodological aspect or approach, what do we mean by methodological approach? Nagarjuna employed his structural analysis of teachings of the Buddha in order to present the deeper and more practical structure for people to inculcate them in their lives and evaluate to the higher ground of the transcendental. Holding on to the graspings of ideologies and doctrines cannot help people to attain liberation from suffering. So his whole idea was that first of all, we need to understand that the theory or the doctrine that Nagarjuna propounded was on the lines of what Sakyamuni Buddha had to say. So when he says that you need not hold on to ideologies or approaches as the two extremes, so this is where he was trying to say that there is something that is beyond these two extremes, and that is the middle path or the Madhyam Marg. And this Madhyam Marg is the most essential in order to attain the higher truth, or in order to move beyond this empirical world to the transcendental phenomenal world where ultimate is the only attainment. The comprehension of the absolute through the categories of thought is the phenomena, and that very absolute, stripped of these categories, becomes actual absolute. So just try and understand that the comprehension of the absolute through the categories of thought is the phenomena. So when we talk about the comprehension of the absolute through the categories of mind or conceptual categories, it becomes the phenomena. And that very absolute, stripped of these categories, becomes the actual absolute. So when the absolute is stripped of these categories of mind, it becomes actual absolute. Hence, this realization has to emerge in the beings. The hunt for answers to those questions which are going to revolve around suffering and which will not lead to any fruitful end makes no sense. So here what we're trying to point out, or what Nagarjuna tried to point out, was that trying to look for that answer which is not going to give you any particular answer as such, or which is not going to satisfy you or make you content as such, is a waste of time. So when there's something that is a waste of time, and on the other hand you have something else which can lead you to the attainment of the higher truth or nirvana, so why not choose that path, which the other alternate path acts as another alternate path and is going to remove you or take you off your sufferings. Nagarjuna's philosophical theory clearly identifies a separate turn in the history, denying certain most fundamental philosophical assumptions. So when we look at Nagarjuna's philosophical theory or the methodology that he uses or incorporates, he uses that methodology in order to deny certain most fundamental philosophical assumptions. Among these assumptions are the existence of stable substances, the linear and one-directional movement of causation, the atomic individuality of persons, the belief in a fixed identity or selfhood, and the strict separation between good and bad conduct, and the blessed and fettered life. So, when we look at these assumptions that he denies, we are saying that the existence of stable substances, this is what he denied. These were the assumptions: the existence of stable substances, the linear and one-directional movement of causation, the atomic individuality of persons, the belief in a fixed identity or selfhood, and the strict separations between good and bad conduct, and the blessed and fettered life. All such assumptions are called into fundamental questions by Nagarjuna's unique perspective, which is grounded in the insight of emptiness, a concept which does not mean non-existence or nihility. So when we look at these fundamental questions, we see that they are these unique perspectives. So first of all, these unique perspectives are grounded in the insight of emptiness, which is also known as shunyata. So for Nagarjuna and his theoretical or philosophical aspect, everything is incorporated in shunyata or emptiness. Now when we talk about shunyata or emptiness, we're not pointing out to mere zero or to mere nihilism. What we are trying to say here by using this term shunyata, what Nagarjuna was trying to say was that it is a concept which does not mean non-existence or nihility, but rather the lack of autonomous existence. So, it does not mean non-existence or nihility, which can be translated as abhav. Rather, it is the lack of autonomous existence, which is known as ni-swabhav. Denial of autonomy, according to Nagarjuna, does not leave us with a sense of metaphysical or existential privation, a loss of some hoped for independence and freedom, but instead offers us a sense of liberation through demonstrating the incorrectedness of all things, including human beings, and the manner in which human life unfolds in the natural and social world. So when we look at this nihi-swabhav, or no existence of an autonomous entity or a being, we trying to point out here is that everything is dependent on other factors for its existence. Now, if I say that I am this and that, I am the one who's done this work, I am the one who knows everyone, I, this particular I is nothing but a conglomeration of various other factors and conditions. When I remove these factors and conditions that make up a whole, or that build me up, then I am nothing except a few parts laid here and there. So these factors that give rise to a particular thing are the factors that make up a particular thing, and our identity is nothing but an amalgamation of these factors put up together in order to form a particular being. Nagarjuna's central concept of emptiness or shunyata of all things pointed to incessantly changing and so never fixed nature of phenomena. So when we're talking about this emptiness or ni-swabhav, we are stating that the phenomena is constantly changing, and it is the reason why everything just comes to an existence for a moment or for a fraction of a moment, and then ceases to exist. When we talk of the methodological approach of Nagarjuna, we see that he has constructed a method called dialectical method or Chatushkoti. So this methodological approach is the way in which Nagarjuna approaches these assumptions that were present during his time in order to refute these assumptions and in order for people to understand that these assumptions are mere assumptions and not to cling on to these as doctrines. He came up with his methodological approach. And this methodological approach is also known as Chatushkoti or dialectical method. Now, let us get into what his methodological approach was. The dialectical method of Nagarjuna. When we look at the mysterious silence of Buddha on the most fundamental questions of metaphysics, which further led Nagarjuna to probe into the reason of that silence. He tried to find the reason behind this silence. He wondered that Buddha was agnostic. If not, then why did he maintain that silence? Through a searching inquiry into this silence, the dialectic was born. Dialectic basically means a method of examining and discussing opposing ideas in order to find the truth. So when we talk about his methodological approach, which is known as dialectical method, we are stating here that it basically means a method of examining and discussing opposing ideas in order to find the truth. For Madhyamik, the dialectic is a series of reductio ad absurdum arguments. So when we look at Nagarjuna's position, he uses reductio ad absurdum arguments. And now let us see the 7th century AD Madhyamik scholar Chandrakirti enumerates 14 questions in his commentary on Madhyamik Karika, and these 14 questions are also known as Avyakrat. Avyakrat means those questions which are unanswered. So these 14 were the questions which were unanswered by the Buddha himself, and Chandrakirti enumerates them in his commentary on Madhyamik Karika. The order of these questions or the questions are as following: whether the world is eternal or not, or both, or neither; whether the world is finite, infinite, or both, or neither; whether the Tathagat exists after death, or does not, or both, or neither. And the fourth set is whether the soul is identical with body or different from it. In the composition of these alternatives, the first is a positive thesis, the second is a post-negative counter thesis. Then there are two basic alternatives which are conjunctively joined to form the third alternate, and then disjunctively denied to form the fourth alternate. Nagarjuna, who is the expounder of Madhyamik school of Buddhism, further develops his dialectical method or Chatushkoti on this line of thesis and antithesis in order to lay down the Buddha's teachings of the middle way regarding causation and its doctrines, and also to state that while causation and dependent origination in themselves represent the very core of Buddhist philosophy, one should avoid clinging on to them like dogmas. So when we talk about the methodological approach of Nagarjuna, all that we're pointing out to is a middle way, to avoid the two extremes of eternalism and nihilism, and to follow the middle path. Now here, when we follow the middle path, Nagarjuna is pointing out to the fact that following the middle path blindly as a doctrine is again wrong. So this middle path needs to be understood and practically applied in one's own life in order for it to be followed. So Nagarjuna is pointing out and saying that he's giving a middle path, but it is not necessary that you have to follow that middle path blindly, or again you have to cling on to it as a dogma or a doctrine. He's just stating you a way to reach the ultimate or to attain liberation from all suffering. And this is the path that he is leaving for you. Now it depends on you if you want to lead on this path or you want to let it go. So when we look at the fourfold dialectic, we see that it is considered to be one of the most important works of Nagarjuna, and it is popularly known to belong to the Madhyamik school, which is also known as Shunyavad. The Madhyamik philosophy is contained mainly in Madhyamik Shastra of Nagarjuna. Madhyamik in Sanskrit word which literally means middle way, on which the whole philosophy of Nagarjuna is based. So we see that coming to the dialectical method of Nagarjuna, as we've talked earlier, it was all on the mysterious silence of the Buddha on 14 questions, and these questions were called avyakrat or indeterminate questions. Now, these questions were mentioned into 4 groups or 4 alternates, and Nagarjuna uses the method of reductio ad absurdum in order to define these questions. So when we look at the methodological approach of Nagarjuna, we say that it is directed against the dogmatists and the realists or the rationalists who maintain a definite view about reality. Nagarjuna argued neither production nor destruction, neither annihilation nor permanence, neither unity nor difference, neither coming nor going. So here, by not falling into any of the 2 opposites or extremes, he is just giving us a way which is the middle way. So this methodological approach, we can see that it has a structure. It is the structure of the dialectics. So when we look into the structure of the dialectic, we see that the origin of dialectic of Madhyamik lives on 4 alternatives in each inexpressible or indeterminate question. Nagarjuna clearly systematized these and formulate them into Chatuskoti, also called the 4-corner negation. Thus, the structure of dialectics consists of a positive thesis, a negative thesis, a conjunctive of the first 2 alternates, and a disjunctive denial of the first 2 alternate. So we see that there is a positive thesis, then a negative thesis, then a conjunctive affirmation of the first 2 alternatives, and disjunctive denial of the first 2 alternatives. Looking into the purpose of this methodological approach, as we've already discussed that it was against the rationalists and the dogmatists, and let us see what actually is the purpose of the methodological approach. Nagarjuna's dialectic was directed against dogmatists who maintained a definite view about reality. He exposed the hollowness of their logic and self-contradictory consequences of their assumptions to disprove the claims of reason to apprehend reality. So, we see that he exposed the hollowness of the logic of dogmatists and the self-contradictory consequences and their assumptions to disapprove the claims of reason to apprehend reality. He demolished every philosophical opinion of his time because he had a definite purpose. Negatively, the dialectic was meant to prove the reality that reality cannot be measured by discursive thought. So when we talking about this reality not being able to be measured by discursive thought, all that we trying to say here is that this discursive thought is very limited in understanding reality. So reality is something which is beyond empirical existence, and this empirical existence which we call to be real is mere illusion. What is real is the absolute or Paramarth, and that absolute or Paramarth cannot be actually described in terms of our verbal understanding. Positively, the dialectic intended mainly three things. The phenomena of empirical reality is a realm of relativity in which an entity is shunya or ni-swabhav, that is, devoid of any independent reality or conditionedness. Reality can be understood only by rising to the plane higher than logical thought, that is, the plane of pragya. And the third point is that reality cannot be expressed in terms of is and is not, because these are the dichotomizing mind. Nagarjuna goes on to show that everything is dependent on something else for its existence. So when we talk about the beings, any being for that matter, human beings or creatures around us, everything that constitute the phenomenal existence is dependent on other factors, be it one or many, for its existence. Nothing can exist without something else existing. This is the meaning of emptiness, and this is dependent arising, which is known as pratitya samutpad. Nagarjuna explains whatever is dependently co-arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. That being a dependent designation, it itself the middle way. Something that is not dependently arisen, such a thing does not exist. Therefore, a non-empty does not exist. So, when we talk about emptiness, we see that the entire phenomenal existence is conditioned and it is empty. Therefore, we cannot talk about anything that is non-empty or anything that is unconditioned in the phenomenal existence. That unconditioned is Paramarth or absolute, and that is something which is non-empty. But when we're talking about the phenomenal existence, we see that everything is empty in essence. Now, coming to the application of this methodological approach, Nagarjuna applies his tetralemma to causality and states that this application brings out only 4 possible views of causality. So when this methodological approach is pointed out to causality or is applied to the law of causality, which was one of those assumptions or prevailing assumptions, prominent assumptions which were prevalent during his time. So he uses his methodological approach in order to refute any particular state on causality. And to do this, he applies his tetralemma to causality and brings out only 4 possible views of causality. First is Swata Utpatti. Second view of causality is Parata Utpatti. The third view is Dvabhyam Utpatti, and the fourth is Ahetu Utpatti. There are no existence evident anywhere that have arisen from self, causation by self. Okay, before going into every doctrine or every possible causality, I would be repeating these 4 again. First is Swata Utpatti, second is Parata Utpatti, third is Dvabhyam Utpatti, and fourth is Ahetu Utpatti. So, The first one, that is Swata Utpatti, which is also known as causation by self. It states that there are no existence evident anywhere that have arisen from self. When an effort seems to arise, it does so because it was already in some sense present in the cause. Its appearance is just the manifestation of something that already existed. The intrinsic nature of existence does not exist in the conditions. Similarly, if the substance or own nature swabhav of the effect were to be found in the cause, production would be rendered meaningless, for there would then be mere self-duplication, not the emergence of more prominent factor. So when we look at a seed, we see that a seed would produce only another seed and not a tree. The tree is found in the seed in potential form, and that it becomes actual in the later form. There is a difference in the state, but not in the identity of substance. To this, Nagarjuna says that the cause cannot be accepted to be partially actual and partially potential. It would then be accepting two conflicting nature in the same thing. So when we talk about a cause, we cannot say or we cannot accept it to be partially actual and partially potential. Because if we do that, we would be accepting two conflicting nature of the same thing. Now comes Parata Utpatti, or production from another. The existent arises from something distinct from itself, or production from something else. Now we see what comes under this. If there is absence of substance or own nature, the possibility of other nature ceases. If the cause and effect has no relationship, then anything can be produced by anything. With such randomness, causality will in itself become meaningless. So he denies this Parata Utpatti by saying that if the cause and effect has no relationship, then anything can be produced by anything. And this production of randomness, causality, will in itself become meaningless. So here we see that Swata Utpatti, which is production from self, and Parata Utpatti, which is production from another, is totally denied by Nagarjuna. Now coming to the third factor, which is Dvabhyam Utpatti, it states origin from both self and another. It is more of a conjunctive theory. So Nagarjuna denies this particular theory as well by saying that it is ridden with the inconsistencies of both the above theories. So when we talked about Swata Utpatti and then we talked about Parata Utpatti, and Nagarjuna denied both of these, now the third one is more of a conjunction or a conjunctive affirmation of the first two factors, which is Swata and Parata. So now if Swata and Parata are ridden with inconsistencies, so it is quite obvious that the third one, which is an amalgamation of both of these, will also be ridden with inconsistencies. Now coming to the fourth causality or fourth form of causality, it is Ahetu Utpatti, which means a non-cause. So it is origin from a non-cause and it merely implies chance. It completely undermines the need for ethics, morality and justice, as there would be no ownership of actions. So if the undermining of ethics is happening or moral values or justice is coming into existence, then if I perform an action and if it is immoral, then I will never be accepting that I am the one who has performed this action. I would completely be putting it on ahetutpatti, which is production by chance. So, as we've seen, the methodological approach is mainly to negate the assumptions or the theories of causality given by various scholars around. So these are divided into four: Swata Utpatti, Parata Utpatti, Dvabhyam Utpatti, and Ahetu Utpatti. And all of these fours are written with inconsistencies, and Nagarjuna denies in his methodological approach the existence of causality. Nagarjuna does not establish any thesis. His method or methodological approach accepts a particular thesis hypothetically, and by eliciting its implication shows up the inner contradiction which has escaped the notice of the opponent. He rigorously examines all philosophical theories that were held by the thinkers in his time. He turns the battery of his dialectic against the concepts such as causality, motion, and rest, the skand, the atman, etc. A pleasant feeling is inconsistent, fabricated, dependently co-arising, subject to ending, subject to vanishing, fading, ceasing. Similarly, a painful feeling is also inconsistent, fabricated, dependently co-arising, subject to ending, subject to vanishing, fading, ceasing. A neither pleasant nor painful feeling is also inconsistent, fabricated, dependently co-arising, subject to ending, subject to vanishing, fading, ceasing. A monk whose mind is thus released does not take sides with anyone, does not dispute with anyone. He words things by means of which or by means of what is said in the world, but without grasping at it. So the methodological approach here is the dialectical method, which denies all sorts of assumptions that were prevalent during Nagarjuna's time. He has asked us to understand this methodological approach, but not to stick to it as a particular doctrine or as a dogma. Rather, to understand the middle path and to tread on this middle path without actually laying emphasis on it as a dogma. So here we are seeing that when we talk about the methodological approach of Nagarjuna, we just pointing out to the dialectical method of Nagarjuna, to the method that he termed to be called dialectic or the fourfold method. And this is the methodological approach which we've talked about, and I hope you got a good understanding of what we understand by methodological approach of Nagarjuna.